Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are here in our entire season all about divorce and about thriving through divorce, about navigating divorce, about coming out of the other side, kind of being more informed, more transformed. And we are just so excited about this entire season with all of our guests that we have lined up. And we're kicking it off with Oona Metz today, who's a psychotherapist and writer, to talk about kind of going through the process of divorce and really how do you navigate that. So, Oona, we are so excited to have you on today.
I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to talk to you both about this.
Great.
Excellent. Well, Oona, can you start by maybe telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for about 30 years and always specialized in group therapy. And also a lot of my practice was treating women going through any kind of transition. So about 15 years ago, I went through my own divorce, and I really wished that I had a support group that I could join. I really wanted to know that I was going to be okay. I wanted to know that my daughter was going to be okay. I wanted to know how to navigate things with my ex and co-parenting, and there was no group. So this little seed got planted in my mind, and I thought, when I'm through with my divorce, maybe this is something I could do, is I could run a group. And so a couple of years later, when I felt like I was really through the worst of it, I started a divorce support group in my practice, and it filled up immediately. So I started the second one. It filled up immediately.
Wow.
And I started the third one. And all three of those groups are still going today. It's a huge need. And there's just not enough people out there running them.
And do people, when you say it's still going today, people are cycling in and out, so people are all at various stages, or do everybody start at the same day and time and stage?
Nope. All of those groups have been going for 15 years now. And come in, they use them. The contract, the agreement is you use the group for as long as it's useful for you. And then when one person leaves, it creates an opening for a new person to come in to the group. And I would say people, minimum people stay 6 months, but I've had people stay 3 years. I'd say the average is like a year and a half.
Okay. Wow.
And it's been really lovely to have people at different stages of the divorce, because the people who are further ahead in the game really can give hope to the people who are starting out. And the people who are newer, that's great for the people who are further along too, to see the new people and to have perspective on I remember when I was at that place. Boy, I've come a long way, So
that's got to be awesome for those people. And have you ever had anybody who's come back for a second divorce, or do you think this is helpful for them also to avoid?
Yeah.
Well,
I have not so far. Not so far.
They're like, I'm too embarrassed to come back. But there are people who do have more than one divorce in their life. But I think that'd be great. Dealing with, so I'm a divorce attorney, and then I also have friends, going through divorce who I help. And one of the things is at that beginning stage, they're so different, right? And then if they can see people who've been through it, and then when they get to that end stage and they can look back and then say to that new person, don't worry, I was so terrified or sickened or whatever, you were,
Yeah, exactly. And I think divorce is such a unique emotional experience. So many of my clients will come to me and they'll say, how is it possible that half of marriages end in divorce and I don't know anyone going through it? And then they'll say, I have these great friends. I have great, I've got this great sister, this great family, but they just don't get it. They don't get what I'm going through. And so for these women to be in a room, in a support group with other women who really get what they're going through is so healing.
And is it only women?
It is.
I love that.
People who identify as women.
I love that. I love it because the dynamics can be so different when you have men in there. And if it's mainly heterosexual people getting divorced, I think the stress of a woman being in there talking to a man because, you know, obviously all the emotions that are coming up. And I think one of the things, it's interesting that you said like they feel isolated or they feel isolated from family and friends at that time. And I think that does happen to a lot of people when you become single, you know, whether it's a divorce or breakup or whatever. And then suddenly everybody's up in your business also pressuring you to try to date again or do things that you're really not interested or ready for.
That's right. That's right. And so I think it feels like such a relief to come to the group where really get the experience.
And are you like in there facilitating?
Yep. I facilitate the group. Yep. So, you know, there's different models of groups, and I believe in all kinds of groups. There are some that are peer-led, and those are great too. And I think that there's some real usefulness to having a therapist leading a group, because then I think sometimes without a therapist in the room, it can get a little uncontained or some kind of a bitch session. Let's just kind of bitch about our, you know, exes.
Bitch about the exes, not like move forward.
Right. And my group is much more intentional about, I always meet with people individually first. We create goals for them. Like, what do you want emotionally for yourself? How do you want to be different in a year from now? Like, what do you want to achieve, you know, for yourself emotionally? Not, you know, sometimes people might say, well, I want a new job. And I'm like, that's a great goal. We're not going to get that done in the group, right?
Right.
Like, how do you emotionally want to feel different in a year from now? So that's kind of the language that I use. And then in the group itself, really attending to the grieving process. And I think people are, you know, my own bias about divorce is that it's incredibly heartbreaking. It's stressful. It's, you know, an awful experience to go through. And it also creates some incredible opportunities for growth and healing and identity and a new lease. You know, I think if the people do the work of grieving, right? If you don't do the work, if you just avoid all the feelings, or if you drink all your feelings, or work all your feelings, or date all your feelings, you know, you may end up repeating stuff or not healing. But I think if you really do the work of grieving, people can come out the other side of divorce and really feel so much better.
Well, you know, and as you're talking about this stuff, I'm thinking about being in groups, and, you know, everybody's divorce is maybe a little bit different. You know, I think your profile, you talked about like the idea of a traumatic divorce or a non-traumatic divorce, so I'm assuming you have probably collections of different people that are there going through not only different stages of divorce, but the divorce itself has kind of varying levels of trauma or impact or toxicity or any of those kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how that works in that kind of a group setting?
Absolutely. So one of the things I always say to my clients is, like, your particular situation, your marriage is unique and your divorce is unique, right? Like, you're never going to find somebody with the exact same content as what you've gone through, right? And yet the feelings that you have as you're going through divorce, that's what binds people together. And so the feelings are so common. And I think that's particularly true if people have kids. And I think there's, you know, certainly a level of heartbreak that people go through if they don't have kids and they go through a divorce. But I think there's an extra kind of level of not only having to deal with your own grief when you go through divorce, but having to help your kids go through their grief too and manage them, and then manage, you know, you have an ongoing relationship with your ex when you have kids. When you don't have kids, you can just say goodbye, right?
Or fight over custody of the dog. I had friends who they went back and forth with the dog for years. But
that's very important. Pets are very important.
It is. But, but like, as you're saying that,
I think
family,
lots of, for lots of people, pets are family. So yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you're talking about too, is like dealing with your own grief, but also dealing with the grief of your children and being around other people that are also trying to figure out how to best navigate the grieving process for their children seems to be really critical. It's just kind of like, I'm just in company, right? Like the idea of just in company with other people who are feeling really tough right now. Things are really tough and I'm not alone. And I think there's a real valid feeling to that, even if the experience is different, of just knowing that you're not alone.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And that you can.
Well, I have something to say that might not be so therapy. You might not love it, but I do want to say I love therapists. I was married to one for 8 years. I feel like we all should have our own personal therapist in life, and every relationship should start out with therapists. But I do think like one aspect of the group, which I had never thought about before, like being in like a support group, maybe for like grief, I tell people to go to grief support, but I had never told any clients like, oh, you should get in a divorce support group. But I think one of the things that might be helpful is for them to see that it can be worse, that there are these like super, super, super contentious people on the other side. And, comparing is despairing, but also if you're comparing and seeing like, oh my God, like this could be way worse. People who have this, oh, my ex is so bad. And then you see what a really bad ex is. And you're like, okay, maybe I could work a little bit harder to, try and settle this or whatever like that. I think that group dynamic would be very helpful with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can kind of get some perspective. We're going through. And I would say one of the things that's common in my group too is that people, I don't believe that there's any such thing as an easy divorce. It always involves some kind of loss. Nobody gets married thinking, well, probably we'll get divorced, or maybe they don't even think maybe we'll get divorced, even though the divorce rate is so high. I think everybody thinks when they get married that they're going to stay married, right? And so there's no such thing as an easy divorce, but there are divorces that are easier in terms of legally easier, right? If you don't have assets, if you're splitting up, you get the blender and I get the couch, rather than there's, 25, 30 years worth of 401ks and family-owned businesses and those kinds of things. So, and if there's no kids or no pets and no assets, I think that does make for somewhat of an easier divorce. And those people don't tend to come to the group.
Interesting. Well, I have clients like that who don't have any assets, but then there's domestic violence, there's the order of protection, there's things like that. And so I think that those people could really, benefit from that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I see a lot of domestic violence. There's a lot of narcissistic abuse going on in the marriages, a lot of coercive control. So we talk a lot about those concepts too in the group in terms of really helping people identify who they were married to and then how to cope with that. Like, what are the best strategies to use with somebody who maybe has narcissistic traits or is controlling?
Well, and being stuck, I think. So what I use with a lot of my clients is this: don't fight the hypo. So in law school, you're given a hypothetical and you have to answer it, and you can't fight the facts of the hypothetical. And so when I'm dealing with these clients and they're like, why won't he accept this? Or why won't he do this? And I'm like, he won't.
Right.
Like, he won't. We can't logic our way out of it. Right. He's not being logical, or she's not being logical. So therefore we have to find another way to deal with this. Like, we can't force that person to accept logic or reality,
That's right. That's right. I oftentimes remind people that they know their ex really well and to use their powers of prediction. What do you think is going to happen if you say to your ex, I really don't like the fact that you're, doing X, Y, Z? What do you think the chances are that your ex is going to say to you, oh, you don't? I'm so sorry about that, and I will never do it again.
Right.
Exactly.
I've really learned a good lesson. What are the chances? If the chances are zero, then you need to think about why you're saying it. Are you going to say something because you need to get it off your chest?
Exactly. Why are you saying it? And when you're actively going through a divorce, or you're doing custody. And, you know, I have all my clients use a parenting app to help them to be able to co-parent. And that's one of the things is, does this need to be said? Does it really need to be said? Or do you need to say it to your best friend and just get it out? And you don't need to say it to that person. And I tell my clients all the time, you don't need to tell that person how their behavior is terrible or shitty. They don't care. They don't care what you think. And it does nothing. And it drives me crazy because I'm like, you can't put this on the other person. If they are what they are.
Right. I mean, I think a big part of the grieving process is letting go of the other person's narrative, your ex's narrative, maybe the family, you know, your in-laws' narrative, but letting go of the other person's narrative is big, and not engaging and trying to convince the other person that this is the way it happened, or this is the truth or the reality. Right?
Or being upset about the fact that that person might be saying that to others. I'm like, well, they could say whatever they want. They can go all over town and say whatever. You cannot live with, like, when people say things, other people look at them and judge them for what they're saying. And if they want to say all kinds of nasty things, that's on them, you know, and you have to move forward in a way that's ethical and that you can live with yourself, and engaging in doing that same or caring what that other person's doing. It doesn't, I don't find it helpful, you know?
Well, and I think too about this idea that it's interesting, people going through divorce or going through breakups or separation sometimes have these different expectations of their partner or their soon to be ex, they're different than how they would have been in the relationship. Like, if this person acted like this in the relationship, they are going to act like this in the divorce. It's almost like they have this idea that they're going to do something different. Like, if they didn't follow through in the relationship and then now they're not getting paperwork back to you about the divorce and you're frustrated, that is not a new behavior, right? But it somehow, it you know, kind of gets you ramped up, like, and another thing, I mean, I can see it, but it's like, well, you like you said earlier, you know your ex better than anybody.
Right.
But it's hard because when you want to end, and I have several clients in that situation with non-responsive exes, and they seem to find non-responsive attorneys as well. Like, all my cases could be settled literally in a week if the other parties were responsive. We could be done. Boom, boom, let's get it done. No, they don't want to. They're hoarders. They're, you know, they won't do the paperwork. They won't do anything. They lay on the couch. I don't know what they're doing over there, but that is something that is very frustrating, I think, for people. Once they've decided they're done, they're still trapped, right?
That's right. I mean, it takes a long time to get divorced, and a lot of it is it's much longer when one person is passive, and that there's nothing to do to push that along. It can be very frustrating. And again, I think that's where the support group comes in so handy, because you know, the family, the friends are like, what? Isn't this done yet? Come on, get this over with. They don't really get how long this process takes, or, and so it's been really helpful to have that group of people who really understand, you know. And I mean, you know, I certainly understand what you were saying before too, Tracy, about, you know, using your logic brain. And I think what we know is that in divorce, your emotions are kind of so ramped up that what we know about emotions when they get ramped up is that your logic brain goes down. While here you are in a divorce where you really need a logic brain, not only to deal with your ex, but just to deal with all the finances and the paperwork and so on and so forth. And so that's a really hard thing too.
So when you find that people are coming to your support group, are they, I mean, it probably depends on what stage they're in, but I mean, some of them are probably contending with like the grieving of the loss of the relationship. Maybe they were left, or maybe they chose to leave, whatever the case may be. And then some of them may be in their kind of, you know, needing a support group to get through the process of divorce, right? The how to negotiate and what do we do with the kids? And I mean, do you see kind of people in those different places in the groups, and how do they interact, or how do they support each other?
Well, one thing I just want to say about that issue about, I think there's an important issue here about leaving and ending. a marriage. People who, I think what we know, the research says, is that in heterosexual marriages, divorces are initiated 70% of the time. 70% of divorces are initiated by women. So what does that mean, right? Does that mean like, oh, women aren't committed to relationships? Oh, they're just, they're impulsive. They just want to leave. They're discontent. No, that's not what it means at all. What I have seen over and over and over and again is that women carry the weight of the relationship. They carry the weight of starting the relationship, of maintaining the relationship, of maintaining the parenting. And a lot of times what I have seen is that in a heterosexual relationship, oftentimes the man kind of leaves the marriage, but it's still a couch, right? He leaves through infidelity. He leaves through financial mismanagement. He leaves through passivity. Like, he's not participating in the marriage, right? He has left the arena and he is sitting on the couch. He will not initiate the divorce. And so I think the 70% divorce initiation rate for women is about women having to, once again, carry the weight of, I can't ride a bicycle built for two myself.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, the women I see, they've gone to couples therapy after couples therapy. They've tried and tried and tried and tried. They don't want to be divorced, but they almost get backed into a corner where there's not another option for them. And so they do have to initiate. And so, sometimes women will say to me when they come to the group, well, I'm the one who chose to leave, and is everybody else in the group the person who got left? So I don't want to be the odd one out, right? And then when I explain that concept, I say, like, well, maybe you initiated, but is that what you wanted? Is that, who left here, So kind of making that distinction between who left and who ended, I think is a really important one. I mean, heterosexual marriage doesn't work so well for women these days. Anyway.
Or ever. I was going to say, or ever. My statistic is, ever. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and about, there's no quicker way to get a man to respond than to say that you want child support. And then suddenly they want to do 50-50 of the child caring when they didn't do that 50-50 rearing in the marriage ever. And I see that over and over and over again, and the children are used as a weapon. And child support and parenting time is used that way as well. I've been called a lot of things, man bash or whatever, but the reality is I see that over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too. A lot.
Yeah, and I was a police officer, and I never once, maybe one or two cases in 8 years, domestic violence wasn't perpetrated by a man. So people can call me what they want, and they're happy to do that, but I'm like, show me the statistics and show me who's doing that. Am I scared to walk down the street, from a woman? And, as a lesbian, I do feel for straight ladies because they are attracted to somebody who's so different. And I'm just not sure that marriage is an institution that men are naturally inclined to want to enter into, but they do because of social pressure. And then, I think there's a lot of unnatural things that happen that don't fit well with them. And then it's time to leave. And, marriage is a legal contract, and most people do not understand that when they enter into it. And they're bound to each other now in certain ways that are very hard to untangle.
Right. And I think that's about to get a lot worse in a lot of red states, are having bills where they're really trying to make divorce much harder. A lot of bills about covenant marriage now coming through, and people are going to get trapped. And I think women are going to be killed. I mean, again,
100%.
I mean, somebody might say that's being, exaggerating, or, I'm being alarmist, but women are going to be, they're going to be trapped.
I've had it all said to me, and that's the reality is, let's look at that. And women need to understand what they're entering into, and it is quite frightening. I literally want to write books that are like, so you want to get married? The next page, don't. And that's the book. Yeah.
Well, they just passed a law. I believe maybe it was in Tennessee. They just passed a law that said that something about the appropriate progress for a life, and it's given to women or girls. And it says step 1 is, graduate high school. Step 2 is get married. Step 3 is have a baby. And it was passed in their legislature as literature that will now be given to kids in classrooms. And so the idea is not only are these marriages potentially problematic when people sign into them, right, the covenant marriages and all these other things, but now the socialization to actually, convince people to go into these marriages or girls or women is also really, really prevalent.
Which is what we did for millennia, right? Now we're going back to it.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple decades of like, oh, okay, things are looking up. And that's the thing. When you look at divorce statistics, I had a straight friend to say to me, oh, my God, you lesbians leave relationships over the smallest things. And I said, well, maybe you stay and when you should leave, right? Like, I'm not staying in something I'm not happy in, but that's not the reality for 90% of the world's women. They don't have that choice.
I think it's really important that we be thinking about and changing the language around that. And I agree with you that I really want us to get away, not you guys, but society to get away from this idea that divorce is a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because if divorce is a failure, then what is a success? Is a success staying in a marriage that's not working for a really long time?
Right, exactly.
No, it's not.
Right.
And that's not good for the people in the marriage, and it's not good for the kids. All the old research with kids said divorce is bad for kids. And the new research does not say that. The new research says conflict is what's bad for kids, not divorce. And nobody wants to go through a divorce. I'm not saying everybody should get divorced right away.
Right.
But if your relationship is not working or your marriage is not working, it's time to make a change. And maybe that is not having that relationship anymore.
And we need to ensure that we have the right to, and fault divorce is a very, very dangerous thing for women. And we live in a no-fault divorce state, and there was only one remaining, New York, I think it was. And then that changed, but now we're going back to, they're trying to make it fault divorce, which makes it harder to get out of.
Right. And I think with fault divorce, one of the really scary things is having to prove. Right? So you have to prove that your spouse is a substance abuser. How do you prove that? You take pictures of them drinking?
Right.
Well, I'm just Friday night. I was just having a beer. How do you prove your spouse is a substance abuser? How do you prove that your spouse uses coercive control against you? Well, even physical abuse. How do you prove that bruise on your arm came from your spouse? You're going to tape them? You're going to videotape them while they're abusing you? You think that's safe? I mean, so it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to go towards that.
Do you have people in your group that are just contemplating divorce, or do you have groups that are for people contemplating divorce, or is everybody already getting divorced?
I don't take people in who are contemplating. And the reason why is because I think what I would like people to do is really make sure that their marriage is fully done, or that they're, not that they're divorced, but that they are fully, they're no longer investing in their marriage. I think it's kind of cross purposes for people to be investing in their marriage and in a divorce group. And so I really ask them, and oftentimes I'll say to people, please, call me back when, if and when you're ready. And oftentimes people do, because what I find is that women think about divorce for a long time before they actually do it. I have people who have been thinking about divorce for 10 years, for 6 years, since they were
I have a client who's a man that wanted to do it 22 years ago, and he didn't leave. And so I'm like, oh my God. I have clients who have been in for years, and they're not been happy.
Yeah.
Well, Oona, I want to switch gears a little bit, because I know one of the things that you really are, one of the things that drew us to you is that you have a model of the phases of divorce. And really want to hear a little bit about your new model. I know it's, you mentioned something about the Kübler-Ross model of grief that's out there that a lot of people might know about. And I'll put some information in the show notes on your model, on the Kübler-Ross model. Can you tell us about what your model is as, people are coming into your groups or you're working with them in any way and they're going through these stages? What do those stages look like?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you also how I developed the model, which is that after running these groups for 15 years, I felt like I had so much useful information just kind of jangling around in my head. And I thought, I need to write this down because there's so much great information out there. So I decided a couple of years ago to write a book. And I now have a book that's coming out in January. It's called Unhitched, the divorce book for women. So as I was writing the book, I thought, well, I should include a stage model of divorce because that would be really helpful for people. And so when I looked into the research, I found that a lot of divorce professionals were using the Kübler-Ross stages of grief. And I'm sure you're familiar with those stages, but for anyone who's not, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross back in the 70s made a stage model for grief for people when they were dying. And she felt like the 5 stages of her model were that first people went through denial, then anger, then bargaining, then depression, and then acceptance. And so I was trying to work with this model as I was writing the book. And I thought to myself, it's pretty good. There's some good parts of that model, but it doesn't quite fit for people who are going through divorce. So then it got me thinking, well, what would fit? What are the stages that really I have seen people go through? And so that's how I developed my model, just by really thinking about and talking to the people in my support groups over the last 15 years. So my model is like Elisabeth's. It starts, it's 5 stages. People don't necessarily go through every stage. They may go back and forth between one stage and another. But basically, it begins with heartbreak. And heartbreak is whether you initiate your divorce or not. Even if you don't initiate your divorce, there's some level of heartbreak of giving up on your marriage, right? And if your divorce was initiated by the other person, there's certainly going to be heartbreak there. So there's heartbreak no matter what. And that stage is the very raw, kind of very beginning stages where people can be really flooded with emotions and just, crying, sad, angry, confused, fearful, but really heightened emotions. That kind of following that stage, I think most people will then go into a stage I would call the roller coaster. And the roller coaster is something we talk about in the group all the time. And that's the stage, that's, I think, the longest stage. And that's the stage where people have a variety of feelings, but they may not be every single day. So they may have like a couple days where they're feeling a lot better. And then all of a sudden they have a hearing, or they hear from their ex, or something, it's a birthday, or something happens. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's an expected thing. Maybe it's unexpected. And all of a sudden they're feeling a ton again. And sometimes they worry, oh my God, does that mean I'm going back to the beginning?
Right.
No, it doesn't. That is just part of the deal of divorce, is that you're on this roller coaster. You're going to feel sad, angry, confused, fearful. And then the next day or the next hour, you might feel relief or freedom or have this moment of joy. And then something else happens and you're going to feel something else again. And so a lot of my work also is just normalizing this. Like sometimes people feel like, I'm going crazy here. Why am I feeling so much or so many different things all at once? And so a lot of my work is just saying, like, that's really normal. It's a really normal stage. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I think roller coaster, it's a different length of time for everybody because everybody has a different kind of divorce, but that's a long stage. And then I think the next stage is mending. And that's where you really start to mend your heart. And people also really turn their attention from their ex, what's their ex doing, turn it more to themselves. What am I doing? How am I helping myself? How am I mending my heart? How am I, taking that yoga class that I used to take and I need to take again, or how am I thinking about my future? How am I taking care of myself? So really doing the mending work. And then that stage, I think, is really followed by a much more complete letting go. Like once you've done that kind of mending work, it makes it possible to do a lot of the letting go work. And that, like we were talking about before, Tracy, letting go of the narrative, letting go of your attachment. Oftentimes people find it easier to let go of their spouse than to let go of the idea of being in an intact family, right? Like letting go of the intact family is more painful. So the letting go stage is really where you're letting go of all, your future together, the status of being married, all of those things. And then I think the last stage is really about moving on, and not that divorce isn't part of who you are and part of your history. It will always be part of who you are, part of your history. But it's not front and center. It's not your day to day. You're moving on. You're spending your energy in other things. You're going back to school, you're getting a new job, you're being in a new relationship, you're dating yourself, you're dating somebody else, you're using you're redoing your garden, you're doing whatever it is that that energizes you and inspires you again.
I have an interesting story.
That's what I would say 5 stages.
Okay. I think that's great. I was watching this video, and we were in a group, and we interviewed the woman who started the group. It's called Club Lilles, and it's about later in life lesbians, so women that are now dating women who were with men before. And this woman posted this video the other day, and she's like, my husband is out on a date, y'all. It's so weird. Like, we decided, she's like, I am the one who told him 1.5 years ago I wanted to be divorced, that I'm into women, but we decided to stay together in the same home so that we could raise our kids. We're still very friendly. And so she was like, this is so weird. I've cooked like 5 things in the last 1.5 hours, and I'm like his mom, like, where is he? And she's like, I'm not jealous, and I don't feel this. But we've talked, she didn't feel jealousy, but she just felt so weird. And she was like, because her whole life, right, it's just her whole life's been, and we've talked about this before, like the people who nest where they stay together in the same home, or they are like, I feel they need to make a clean break from each other. I know it's hard financially, and in certain cities it's much harder, but like when you stay, like this lady, even though she wasn't attracted to her husband anymore, it was so hard for her, right, to sit there.
That's right.
And he needs to move on. I talked to a friend, I went out with a friend a couple weeks ago, and she's like, oh, my husband wants to date. And she like told him a while ago she wanted a divorce, right? But then I'm like, well, you can't have it both ways. Like, you can't tell him you want to be done with him and then be like, oh, don't date, Right. And so I feel like part of the process is making a break.
It's part of the grieving process, and it does not happen all at once. It takes a long time, and it takes work, to go through that. I mean, divorce, I often say, like, why is divorce should not be a singular noun. It should be plural, because there's so many different layers of divorce, right? There's so many different pieces of it that people have to go through.
I think of like those, when you're talking about the roller coaster, like those triggering moments, like for Tracy, there was this person who was saying, like, I didn't think it would bother me that my husband my ex-husband went out on dates, but it did. But like, sometimes you don't even know what those triggers could be.
That's
like,
right.
Sometimes you're walking through your lawn and you see like an overgrown tree, and you're like, oh, my partner was supposed to trim that tree. And then like all of a sudden you get upset, or maybe it's a sense of loss around, some of the more obvious ones are like holidays, but it could be anything. Even going to your first social gathering with all the couples that you're used to going with, and you are by yourself. And then, realizing that like that sense of loss of my companion, those kinds of things I think about is sometimes just not even knowing when they're going to hit you.
Yeah. Also, one of the things I find a lot too is if during the divorce process, if anybody has any medical issues, oftentimes that can really bring up a lot of feelings. And then sometimes what I'll say to them is, well, what do you think your ex would do in this situation? And then they realize, oh, well, actually, he wasn't that useful when I was sick. Well, but there's still this longing, right? There's a longing for companionship. There's a longing that somebody's going to be there and is going to care and take care of you when you're sick.
So don't you think some of that, and I think this applies to parents and children as well, right? So if I'm sad I didn't get a good parent or whatever, and I'm really sad about my mom, but maybe I'm not really sad about that particular mom. What I'm sad about, and I'm saying like anybody, is the lack of that mom. And I think that what happens to a lot of people in divorce, from what I've observed with my clients, is they're not particularly sad about that person that they were married to. They're sad about the fact that they didn't have the kind of relationship that they believed they would have, and that was the fantasy in their mind, is that, you know, and especially I think for heterosexual women, they're like, oh, we're gonna grow up, we're gonna have the beautiful wedding, and it's gonna be so idyllic, and then, you know, that's not really for 90% of the people what happens.
Right. So the grief is about the divorce, but the grief is also about the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's right.
And the worldview, right? I think
and the intact family and the intact family. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, so many people, they don't necessarily miss their spouse, but they do miss really being part of an intact family. That's really important to a lot of people.
But I think it's a false narrative sold to people about what other people are capable of, that they can have this, you know, incredible romantic relationship that also brings in children, that where one person has to work, or what, you know, like, and I think that's why what's happening in society right now with this, like, trying to, you know, hold on to this 1950s model of the way things should be, is that we are sold a false narrative. What is the reality of what people can actually do in relationship? They cannot do what we're led to believe should be done, is that, oh, one person can stay home with the children and the other person's just going to go to work and they're going to be so happy. Because no, that person staying home ends up feeling terrible. They're upset, they're isolated, and working feels all the stress and pressure. And all of these things, like, pile on the relationship, and the relationship cannot handle it. And then society is not set up to help any of these people deal with the stresses of the relationship. I have a lot to say about this, and I could go on for hours, and I get very worked up and upset about it. But everybody in society is being sold false beliefs about things. And I do think that marriage is a huge one of what marriage will be.
Right. And I think you're right. We do not have, in society, we have not set up a family friendly society for people. When people have to pay $30,000 to send their kid to preschool, right? I mean, when we don't have Family Leave Act, when people can't get health insurance, I mean, it's stress upon stress upon stress, right?
And people don't say that to them when they're saying, I want grandchildren. They're saying, I want grandchildren. They're not saying, hey, this is how expensive it's going to be. It is my opinion now that all people who intend to have children should make sure that they can support those children on their own, because most of my clients are not getting financial support from their ex. And I would not put myself in that situation. And I want to advise people not to. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I know we could keep talking to Oona for a really long time. I do want to kind of circle back around to one more thing before I know we're going to wrap up here. Going back to your model of grief, because, I mean, we're talking about all these kinds of things that are eliciting grief, right? I mean, the divorce, the loss, the process of it, the loss of the potential future you could have had, this idyllic societal expectation, all of that. And you talked about these really, really relevant kind of stages of what people are going through in the divorce grieving process. Do you find, or how do you handle when people are in your groups that maybe, I don't want to say get stuck in a phase, but, sometimes people do sit a little bit longer than is probably good for them. Like, how to help them move along? Is there, or does the group do that for each other? Like, and I'll just say it from my own personal experience. I went to one group thing, and after a breakup, and there was a woman in there who had been coming weekly for 8 years and was still crying. And people, I didn't know how fresh her breakup was. And so somebody mentioned it and said she's been coming for 8 years. Her ex had actually repartnered, remarried, and had children. And she was still coming to the group crying. And so I don't want to judge anyone for how long it takes them to go through the process. But at the same time, that felt like really like she might be stuck. So how do you help people who might feel stuck?
And that's probably not somebody who is best served in a group or who best serves a group. That's somebody who needs some individual work. And maybe there's some traumatic stuff going on and getting some trauma therapy, get unstuck. I mean, one of the ways I help people to be unstuck is that I always meet with people twice before they come to the group, and we create the goal. We've talked about this before. We create goals for them so that they're always looking ahead for the next year. What are your goals that you want to be working on emotionally? And if they say, well, I don't really have any goals, or I just want to watch the group, or I don't want to feel better, then they're not a good match for the group. And then within the group setting, every 6 months, I meet with them individually again, and I say, let's look over your goals. How are you doing? You said in the beginning that you really wanted to reduce your isolation. You wanted to create community. And how are you doing with that? Because I noticed last week you were saying you were creating community, and that's so good, And so what else are you, what were your other goals that you had? Let's look at that. And so you're keeping people moving along. That's what I do. And I think also the group is really good for accountability. And sometimes people will say, like I knew the group was coming on Wednesday. I've got 2 groups that meet on Wednesdays, and there's a lot of calls that get made on Tuesdays. So they're like, I knew the group was coming on Wednesday, so I wanted to call my lawyer because I know you guys said last week I should be calling and doing this thing, right, that I don't want to do. And so people in the group hold each other accountable too. And not that there's, nobody gets punished if they don't do the thing, but I think it's great to have a group of people who say, hey, did you make that phone call last week? Oh, you did? That's great. That's great. But I think the other thing is I'm patient too with people. I mean, I also know that it takes, 8 years is a long time to be still crying in a group over a breakup, but I also know that it takes a long time. So I'm going to help people move, but I'm also going to be patient that I know it takes a long time. There's one other thing I just wanted to say before we ended too, is that, I think you probably know now from listening to me talk that I really, really believe in the power of a support group. And I believe in it so much, and there's so few out there. And so what I finally did last year was I created a training program. So I'm now training people across the country on exactly my model on how to run these divorce support groups. So I'm training mental health professionals. I've just had a second cohort come through. So there's more groups now happening in Boston. There's 3 additional groups happening in Massachusetts. I've got somebody trained in New York City, somebody trained in Austin, Texas. So that's a wonderful thing to be spreading this model around the country, because it's so helpful for the people who are in it. And also, I can't even tell you, as a therapist, it's so gratifying to run these groups because people make so much progress. And it's so wonderful to see the connections that are made, the lifelong connections that are made in the group, and then the way that people just progress in leaps and bounds over the time that they're in the group. So as a therapist, it's also very, very gratifying to run. And then for the people who are in it, so many people say, I have no idea how I would have made it through my divorce with this group, So
do you do any virtually, or are they all in person?
So the new model that I'm using right now is they come for a weekend. We do all the didactic kind of lecture part in a weekend. I bring in a lawyer, a mediator, and a financial person as well. And I give them all the nuts and bolts of how to run the group clinically. And once they go home and start their groups, then there's 10 weeks of online supervision that comes along with it. So it's live supervision. We're talking about how to set up the group, what's going on in the group, helping them problem solve, and make sure that they're just doing a really good job running the group after they've left the weekend training. So
that's awesome. So then she's talking
about the therapist.
Yeah. But also like the participants, if they wanted to come to a support group, is it in person? So like where these people are located, the trainers, is really important, or is it virtual for the participants?
So the groups that I run are all in person. And I've trained people to do both personal groups, in-person groups, and virtual groups. So I have somebody right now who's doing a virtual group as well, who I've trained.
That's awesome, especially for our listeners who want to reach out, maybe get connected, who aren't in one of those places that you all are at, because it sounds like what you're offering is absolutely amazing, transformative, very supportive of people, validating, it certainly you feel like you're not alone. And so if we were to get our listeners in touch with you, do you have a website we could share, or Instagram, or any social media handles?
Yes, thank you so much. So my website is just my name. It's oonametz.com. That's OONAMETZ.com. And I'm also on Instagram, and I would love to have you follow me there. It's also Oona Metz on Instagram. So, and I have a lot of free resources on my website, so people can feel free to check it out. There's a lot of articles on there, some that I've written, some that I haven't, and a lot of free resources. So even if you're not coming to see me, feel free to check out my website.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, Oona, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. A very interesting conversation. I mean, I know that we kind of hit a lot of ground here talking about really the benefit of support groups, but understanding the stages of divorce, also understanding the implications of marriage and where we're talking about it going potentially in the future, and how to kind of be prepared, or at least understand the notions of what marriage might mean today, even before possibly ending up in a divorce situation. So we'll put in the show notes here about your book, and make sure that we can link to that so that we have some resources for our listeners. So again, thank you so much for being on. Tracy, thank you for your insight as usual, and this great conversation. And for all of our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.